I was really honored to, obviously, to be invited to give these lectures. I want to know how many people here have ever heard of the trolley problem? Oh my God. How many people here regret ever having heard of it? Yeah. Well, you see, not many, so that's a good sign. Okay. In 2010, I was asked to write an entry on the trolley problem for an encyclopedia of ethics, and I decided that I would try, though I hadn't written on it for a while. And I looked at some more recent literature that had come about and discovered, new things that were really very surprising to me. I was only given a very short space in which to write, and so 2,000 words to give the history, solution, objections, etc. So there was a lot left over, and I hope to explore these topics at greater length, and I'm taking this opportunity to do so, and I want to thank everybody for their indulgence in allowing me to do this. So some philosophers that have already been described by Chris Coutts as, I call them consequentialists, believe that insofar as the greater number of people surviving is the greater good, it is always right for anyone to do what brings about their survival. Non-consequentialists deny that it's always right to do whatever brings about the greater good, though they need not deny that consequences matter in some ways to the rightness of acts. As support for their own view, the non-consequentialists have cited what's known as the transplant case in diagram 1. I'm not used to using diagrams. I usually ask people to just sort of imagine, or I write, but advisors have suggested that I use this. So you've got diagrams in front of you. Number 1. If a doctor kills a single healthy person, she will be able to use his organs to produce what we assume is the greater good, saving 5 fatally ill patients. Yet, non-consequentialists say it seems impermissible for the doctor to kill the 1 to save the 5. And this is not my ingenious case, right? This is way back in the literature, right? Philippa Foot mentions it in her article, and it's been much discussed. So as you see, you have very minimal descriptions here. I'm in the Agnes Martin School of Diagrams. She was a great minimalist artist whom I admire. And I don't use icons or anything, so you just have to imagine that there's 1 person and 5 people here. However, the philosopher Philippa Foot noted that even many non-consequentialists seem to think that it's permissible to kill 1 to save 5 in the following case. A driver is in control of a trolley, that Foot called a tram, when it becomes clear that it is headed toward killing 5 people on 1 track. It can only be stopped from killing the 5 by the driver redirecting it away from them onto another track where it will kill 1 different person. Now, this is represented in diagram 2, with the trolley being represented by the short little cross line. It's headed towards the 5, but it could be redirected towards the 1. Now, some non-consequentialists find it mysterious that it is permissible to kill in this case, but not in transplant. Even though it is a question of killing 1 to save 5, and they think that explaining this mystery is the trolley problem. I must admit, that's what I thought. However, this suggestion about what the trolley problem is should not be understood so narrowly that the problem only concerns these 2 cases. I mean, people say, sometimes in objecting to so much time spent on this topic, how often am I going to meet a trolley, or how often am I going to have to transplant organs, right? The point is that this is a more general issue, right? The problem concerns not only these 2 cases, but at the very least, all cases that are structurally similar. For example, one might face the question of whether it is permissible to redirect the trolley off a track and onto a slope headed towards someone far away from any track, even though one may not generally kill someone to stop a threat to others, as the transplant case is supposed to show. Similarly, the question might arise of whether it is permissible to redirect a flood or unmanned missile headed to a large city with many people toward a country town with few people in it, even if one may not kill people in some other way to stop the threat to the large city. Apparently, Churchill faced an issue like this during World War II. We might also face an analogous problem when lives are not at stake, but only significant harms to either a larger or a smaller group of people. For convenience, I'm going to use the transplant and trolley cases since they may help exemplify the general problem. Even more broadly, we could see the trolley problem, understood as I have so far described it, right, as presenting a challenge to nonconsequentialists who in some rough way think there is what is called a side constraint on harming non-threatening people to produce greater goods. Now, a side constraint is not merely a factor that weighs against producing the greater good. It is supposedly a factor that has priority over producing the greater good. That is, we may produce the greater good only if doing so is consistent with respecting that constraint. One view is that side constraints reflect fundamental aspects of our conception of persons and their status, which are backgrounds to any pursuit of the good of such beings. The challenge is to explain exactly what the side constraint on harming amounts to if it does not exclude turning the trolley and thus killing one person to save the 5 others. Now, in taking up this challenge, all right, there are 2 general questions with which we shall deal in these lectures. First, whether there is a moral difference between killing others, such as the one person in this case, and only letting people die, right, such that someone who would otherwise kill many people may permissibly kill fewer other people instead, but someone who would otherwise only let many people die may not kill fewer other people instead. So, I mean, you just to take the missile case I gave, to interlope here with the example, you know, Churchill didn't send the missile towards the big city. It was, you know, the Nazi powers that did. If he were to allow the missile to hit the big city, he would be letting those people die, all right? If he turned the missile, he'd be killing. If the Nazis decided to turn from the large city to the small city, for them, it's a choice between killing versus killing, just to sort of get your mind around that in a bigger framework. Another question with which we shall deal is whether there is a constraint on harming people for the sake of producing a greater good, only when we come to harm them in some ways but not in others. In other words, is coming to harm them in some ways consistent with proper respect for persons that the constraints were supposed to perhaps, you know, exemplify, but harming them in other ways is not inconsistent. Now, these questions are analogous to those detectives in mystery cases typically ask when someone has been killed, namely, who done it and how was it done, right? And like prosecutors, we shall be concerned with whether the answers to these questions, who done it and how was it done, bear on whether foul play occurred or all is above board, to continue with that metaphor of Holmes. Now, the first lecture today will focus on the who question, and the second lecture, we plan to chain you here overnight to make sure you come back, right, is the how question, okay? So I'm going to first discuss various elements and proposed solutions of the trolley problem today, as I've so far characterized it. I will then consider some alternative views of what the trolley problem is, which I was, surprised to discover when I went to write this encyclopedia article. The second part of this lecture will deal with some recent views of the great philosopher Judith Thomson, who is here, for which we're all tremendously grateful today, which she expressed in her 2008 paper, Turning the Trolley, about how a moral distinction between killing and letting die may eliminate what she thinks of as the trolley problem. So we can all go home, forget about it, and those of you who regretted ever having heard about it, great. The third part, however, will consider a different argument for the conclusion that Thomson favors, but ultimately what I try to do is resurrect the trolley problem so that we can keep on worrying about it. Xanax is provided at the exit. Okay, now, understood as the contrast between transplant and trolley, the way I introduced this originally, and you have the diagram to remember what transplant and trolley is. Many proposals have been offered to solve the trolley problem. One relies on a view that is known as the doctrine of double effect. This doctrine implies that it is impermissible to kill in the transplant case because the doctor intends the death of the single person as a means to saving the 5, or at least his severe violation in order to get those organs. The doctrine of double effect holds that it is wrong to intend an evil such as this person's grave harm or death, even as a means to a greater good. In Foote's case, by contrast, okay, the doctrine of double effect takes a different view. This is the trolley driver case, right? There's two options, either let it, let go to the 5, right, or turn it. The doctrine of double effect holds that it is, even though it's wrong to intend, right, a person's death as a means to a greater good. In Foote's case, by contrast, the death of the one person is only a foreseen side effect of turning the trolley. And according to this doctrine of double effect, these foreseen harms can sometimes be outweighed if greater goods are produced by what we do that produces the harm. Okay? So in this case, 5 lives saved is a greater good relative to one person's being alive. Given that the death is foreseen, the doctrine of double effect says that's why it's permissible. That's the distinction it draws between these two cases. Responding to this proposal, Foote argued that intuitively, it's often wrong to do what will merely foreseeably cause someone's death without intending to produce the death even, in order to maximize lives saved. So she's arguing that the doctrine of double effect just permits too much, okay? For example, she said, it seems impermissible for a doctor to use a gas that will save his 5 patients, in that first case, let's suppose, if it is foreseen that the gas will kill one immovable bystander, right, in a room nearby, even though this death is not intended as a means to saving the 5 in any way, shape, or form. It's a side effect. They wish that I could avoid it, but I can't. They can't. And she held it was impermissible for the doctor to use that gas in that case. Similarly, it seems to me impermissible, right, for the driver to set off a bomb that will stop the trolley from hitting the 5 when a piece of that bomb will kill a bystander as a side effect, as is described or represented in your third diagram. This is a case where the driver sees that he can't turn the trolley, but he could stop it from hitting the 5 by setting off this bomb that will stop the trolley, but the bomb itself is going to kill one person as a side effect. Right? Now, Foote is objecting to the idea that you can always, therefore, do things that will foreseeably harm others. You don't intend the harm, but that's not enough, all right? And therefore, she doesn't think the doctrine of double effect points to a distinction between these first 2 cases that can explain why the doctor can't act and transplant, but the trolley driver can turn the trolley. Now, other people have argued against the doctrine of double effect, furthermore, that intending a harm in and of itself cannot make an act impermissible. That even that part of the doctrine of double effect is not right. So you can imagine that the driver, right, who has to turn the trolley in the diagram 2, right, wouldn't bother to turn it, right? He doesn't really care about the 5 he would kill until he notices that the one person on the other track is his enemy, right? And he turns it in order to kill that one person. Now, that's a bad intention to have. However, it doesn't seem to make turning the trolley away from the 5 impermissible. So there are various problems that people have pointed out with using the doctrine of double effect to explain these differences in cases. Foote's own proposal was that the driver in trolley diagram 2 may redirect the trolley because he is choosing between killing 5 and killing 1. And he should kill fewer rather than a greater number. By contrast, the doctor in the first transplant case is choosing between letting 5 die, sick people, and killing 1. And her view was that the negative duty not to kill takes precedence over the so-called positive duty to aid, to not let die, to come to assistance in saving the patients. Hence, the distinction between killing and letting die here is held to explain and justify the non-consequentialist intuitive judgments in both Foote's case and in the transplant case. If you just focus on what these agents would otherwise do, Would they otherwise be letting die, or would they otherwise be killing? Now, one possible objection to Foote's proposal is that it could be unclear whether the trolley driver really is in the process of doing what will kill the five, or rather is only in a position to let what will happen to them, namely the out-of-control trolley mowing them down, occur. If the latter were true, he may become the killer of five in virtue of having first started the trolley, but at the time of deciding whether to turn it, perhaps he would be only letting the trolley continue, and so only be letting the five die if he did not redirect. Now, Judith Thomson agrees with Philippa Foote that the driver would be killing the five if he does not redirect. In her 2008 article, she imagines a case where a car driver, quote, suddenly sees five people on the street ahead of him, but his brakes fail. He cannot stop his car. He can only continue onto the street ahead or steer to the right, killing one person, or steer to the left, killing himself. Maybe he goes into a tree. If he doesn't steer to one or the other side, if he simply takes his hands off the wheel, he runs the five down and kills them. He cannot at all plausibly insist that he merely lets them die. So similarly for the trolley driver. Hence, Foote and Thomson see Foote's case, this second trolley driver case, as similar to one in which a driver is at the very cross point, at the very beginning of the tracks, the bottom, and must decide whether to turn the trolley toward five or toward one. Now, I'm going to assume that this is, in fact, correct in Foote's case, the correct description, though I may return to it below if we have time, but I'm just going to assume that he would be killing if he, lets that trolley go on rather than killing the five. Here's another objection to Foote's proposal. Remember, the proposal was that someone who would otherwise kill but not merely let die, right, may kill fewer other people. The objection is that her proposal would permit too much. To see this, suppose the driver could stop the trolley from hitting the five only by pressing a button that causes a device to topple a fat man standing on a bridge. This is very non-PC. I apologize to everybody who's overweight. But this, as I say, this literature started before me, the genius, whatever, right? This is way, way back, okay? This, I believe, was Judith Thomson's brilliant case, toppling the driver. Not the driver. No, this was not her case. She had a slightly different case, so I'll come to that. In any case, in this case, what we're doing is the driver is toppling a fat man in diagram 4, one person off a bridge in front of that trolley, right? And it so happens that his weight will just stop the trolley from hitting the people. It might divert it a little bit or just stop it. Now, intuitively, the driver toppling the fat man, pressing that button, seems to me as impermissible as killing, as the doctor killing in transplant. Even if toppling, like redirecting, would involve the driver killing one rather than killing five, all by purely mechanical means. Now, maybe, as they say, you'll get off the track at this point with me. I think that it's impermissible for that driver to, topple that fat man in front of that trolley. Now, Thomson introduced a case, a brilliant case, in which a bystander, not the driver, can only stop the trolley, because the driver can't do anything. Nothing works in his machines. And that bystander can only stop the trolley by pushing the fat man off that bridge in front of the trolley. She concluded that his doing so was impermissible. That was about the bystander. However, I'm here concerned with the driver and whether the driver may topple the fat man, and it seems to me that he may not do it either, right? In addition, as I said when discussing diagram 3, I don't think that the driver may set that bomb to stop the trolley when a piece of the bomb is going to go off and kill a bystander as a side effect. This is a different bystander. This is, just someone who's a single person who will be hurt by the bomb, not someone who can't turn a trolley. Those who will otherwise impermissibly kill the five, I think, may not do just anything to minimize the number that they kill, even when doing so would be the strict alternative at a specific time to killing the five. For example, suppose the driver's taking his hands off the steering mechanism would be his killing the 5, as Thomson and Foote claim, and his keeping his hands on it will allow him to wiggle the trolley and so topple the fat man that way, and that fat man will stop the trolley. Here, toppling the 1 to stop the trolley would be the alternative to one way of killing 5 people, but I think it's impermissible. Now, if that's so, then Foote's failure to consider the limits on the driver, on what the driver can do, is one problem with her analysis. Given the limits on the ways in which the driver may kill, some might think that the trolley problem just is to explain why it is permissible to kill some people in some ways, but not others. You redirect the trolley, but you can't topple that fat man, as the alternative to killing a greater number of people, like the trolley driver will do if he goes down and mows down the 5. Even if it is not permissible to kill someone as the alternative to merely letting others die, even if that's off the table. Okay, so that's a slightly modified view of the Foote proposal. But another challenge to the adequacy of Foote's killing, letting die explanation of the difference between transplant and trolley is that it would permit too little, it seems, ruling out some permissible acts. This was the point of Thomson's brilliant bystander two-option case. So in order to minimize the number of diagrams, you can just look back at the second trolley driver case and just imagine that it's not the trolley driver who has to turn the trolley, but this bystander. So it's a bystander two-option case. All right. The driver is unable to do anything to stop the trolley, but a bystander, Mr. X, can press a switch and redirect the trolley. This case, as I say, is represented in that diagram if you just do a little imaginatively eliminating of the driver. The bystander's doing this, right, would involve his killing 1 rather than letting 5 die. He's just a bystander. He didn't have anything to do with directing the trolley towards the 5. If it is permissible for him to redirect the trolley, killing 1, though he would otherwise let 5 die, the distinction between killing and letting die will not explain why it is permissible for the driver to kill 1 in Foote's trolley case, but not permissible for the doctor to kill 1 in the transplant case, because the doctor in that case, like the bystander, would be otherwise letting 5 die if he kills the 1, takes his organs. Now, it might be the case that the driver has an obligation to kill the 1 to save the 5 because he would otherwise kill them, and that a mere bystander, while he's permitted to turn the trolley to save the 5, doesn't have an obligation to do so. That's possible, okay? We could also imagine a case in which I think a driver himself would be choosing between letting 5 die and merely killing 1, because we could suppose that the driver was, thrown from the trolley at the time when the brakes stopped working, right? And now he's outside the trolley near the same sort of switch that a bystander would have to use. And he sees his trolley, hurtling down to kill the 5. And I call this a bystanding driver case, I think that it's permissible for the driver to redirect the trolley, in this case, when he's in the role of the bystander. Now, of course, he will be someone who will become a killer of the 5 if he doesn't turn the trolley. But at that very time, it seems as though he would otherwise merely be letting them die. In many possible cases, it seems clear that sometimes an agent who starts a threat to someone and then separately refuses to save them from the threat will merely have let the 5 or the other people that he has threatened die at that time, that he does not save them, even though in virtue of this and his past act, he will have killed people. I'm not denying that. Indeed, Thomson once discussed a version of a transplant case much like this. She imagined that the 5 in transplant suffered from organ failures caused by the very doctor who contemplates taking organs from his healthy patient to save his own victims. One of these doctors, Strangelove types, right? Okay. She concluded that at that time when she wrote that at the very time when he would act, right, when he would have to decide whether to take the organs from that healthy patient to rescue his own victims, this culpable doctor faced a choice between killing one and letting his 5 victims die, and that he had no more right than any other doctor to kill in the transplant case, even though he would then become the killer of the 5 if he did not save them. Suppose that unlike the culpable doctor, the driver in the bystanding case, the bystanding driver case that I'm now imagining, is permitted to avoid becoming the killer of the 5 by redirecting that trolley to fewer people, even though he's still not permitted to topple that fat man to stop the trolley, any more than that culpable doctor could kill the one person to get his organs to save the 5 victims. Now, at this point, it would seem then that there is some difference, it seems to me, in the way in which killing is being permitted to occur, right? If you can redirect the trolley, but you can't topple that bystander, and neither the driver who would become a killer or would kill, or the bystander may not topple that fat man, right? I think that we should be, thinking about why are there these differences in how we come to kill people. Now, just as a summary of some of the things that I've been talking about right now, I want you to just look at the summary chart here where we, for convenience, I've distinguished between redirecting and toppling to stop the trolley. And we have, the choice between killing versus merely letting die, and killing versus letting die when you will, as a result, in fact, have killed someone, because you started this process that will cause their death and you're not stopping it. Now, in her 2008 article, Turning the Trolley, Thomson claims that the question of why a bystander may permissibly redirect the trolley but not topple the fat man over the bridge to stop the trolley, that just is the trolley problem. That's what it is. She refers to the question of why a driver who was on the trolley, driving it, and would kill the 5 may instead redirect the trolley, but a doctor in transplant may not kill that one patient to save the 5. She refers to that as Mrs. Foot's problem, which surprisingly, she says, is not the trolley problem. Now, I was writing this article for the encyclopedia, and oh my God, I don't even know what it is, all right? So the thing is, this was one shock, all right? However, it seems to me that the trolley problem should not be conceived as only the question of why a mere bystander may redirect the trolley but not topple the fat man to stop that trolley. This is because it seems to me the same problem of redirecting being permissible but toppling not being permissible arises for the trolley driver. At least so it seems to me. And this is so whether he would otherwise kill the 5 at the time or would be letting them die, as in the bystanding driver case. However, the most striking claim offered by Thomson in her 2008 article is that she now believes that it is not permissible for the mere bystander to redirect the trolley. Indeed, Thomson, in that article, reverses herself, because she introduced this brilliant case of the bystander, claiming that it showed that, people who weren't going to otherwise kill, but only let die, could be permitted to kill others sometimes. But she now reverses herself, claiming that it is not any more permissible for the bystander to redirect the trolley toward the one than to topple the fat man to stop the trolley. And therefore she, a founding mother of the trolley problem, as I think of her, right? She's much more than that, but she's at least that, believes that there is no trolley problem, given the way she understands the problem. Right? On these grounds, she further claims that her original bystander case cannot be used as an objection to Foot's proposal for distinguishing Foot's own trolley case from transplant, namely that killing 1 is the permissible alternative to killing 5, but it's not a permissible alternative to letting 5 die. And the driver may redirect, the bystander may not redirect, and the doctor may not kill and transplant. Okay? Indeed, she endorses Foote's proposal for distinguishing, as I say, transplant and her trolley case. Now, in the remainder of this lecture, I took a deep breath and, I thought, what am I going to think about the trolley problem now? So in the remainder of this lecture, I want to consider whether Thomson's reversal on the permissibility of a mere bystander redirecting that trolley is right. But I first want to emphasize that even if it were only the driver, the regular driver on the trolley, who was permitted to kill by redirecting, if he's not permitted to kill by toppling that fat man or setting the bomb, even to save himself from killing the 5, then at least one component of the trolley problem, as I originally thought of it, will remain. Namely, there seem to be moral differences in how we come to kill someone. Sometimes those differences allow us to kill, and other times they don't. But now let me just consider Thomson's recent discussion of her mere bystander case. And really, I've been trying to figure out what, pack it in with the trolley problem or resurrect it. So, this is what I'm discussing. One of her arguments against the permissibility of a mere bystander redirecting is based on what she calls the bystander 3-option case, which is number 6 on your handout. By contrast to the ordinary 2-option bystander case, in which the bystander has a choice between letting 5 die, the trolley should go on and hit them, or redirecting the trolley to a track where a different person will be killed by it, in the bystander's 3-option case, quote, the switch available to this bystander can be thrown in 2 ways. If he throws it to the right, then the trolley will turn onto the spur of track to the right, thereby killing 1 workman. If he throws it to the left, then the trolley will turn onto the spur of track to the left. The bystander himself, Mr. X, stands on the left-hand spur of track and will himself be killed if the trolley turns onto it. Or, of course, he can do nothing, letting 5 workmen die, end quote. Now, this is where the rubber hits the road, which way you want to have it. And Chris says, suppose you're in that position, okay? High and mighty you talking about, well, I'm saving 5. Surely I can redirect to kill 1. And Thomson says, oh, yeah? Would you redirect to yourself? Okay? That's the short summary of the view, all right? Concerning the bystander's 3-option case, Thomson first argues that the bystander may not redirect toward the right, where that one other person is, when he could redirect towards himself, as, quote, there is no way in which he can decently regard himself as entitled to make someone else pay, end quote, a cost to others that he wouldn't pay himself, given that the other person, like the bystander, does not want to die to save the 5. However, she then also argues that the bystander is not morally required to sacrifice his life to save the 5. Doing so would be altruism, and this is consistent with the nonconsequentialist perspective that Chris spoke about. They not only believe in constraints on doing certain things to bring about the greater good, but what they call personal prerogatives not to bring about the greater good. We do not have this duty to bring about the greater good. Don't shake your head, Shelley. I know you disagree with that. We've got a real-life consequentialist in the audience. Okay. So the idea is that we do have this prerogative, right? It would be altruism to give up your life. It's not a duty to save those 5, even if it were the greater good. So given that he has permission only to harm himself to save the 5, this person who is the bystander in control of things, that's the only permission he has, as she says it. He can't make others pay what he could pay. He can only harm himself. But given that he doesn't want to, and he needn't morally do so, he should just let the 5 die. When in the bystander's 2-option case, Thinking about that case, number 2, where it wasn't the driver but the bystander who had to choose. He only had 2 options. Let it go to the 5 or turn it on that one stranger, right? There is actually no option in that case of turning the trolley on himself. The third option is gone. But Thomson says there is still, in the 2-option case, quote, no way in which he can decently regard himself as entitled to make someone else pay, end quote, a cost that he would not pay if he could. Let us consider this first argument. There's another one, but I just want to consider this first one. I don't know what time is like. Maybe we'll never get to the second, or you'll be here all night. But those of you who are willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, let me know. Okay, so here's the first argument. Thomson moves from a 3-option case to a conclusion about a 2-option case, right? She said if you're not willing to turn it on yourself when you have that option, you just can't turn it on someone else, right? Even when you don't have the option of turning on yourself. In particular, the move is from, as I say, a 3-option case in which the alternative that is eliminated in the 2-option case, namely the bystander killing himself, is not chosen, wouldn't be chosen in the 3-option case. Now, it might be said that one problem with her argument is that one cannot in general move from a conclusion in a 3-option case to one in a 2-option case. For example, if we have 3 choices between letting a murder occur or stopping the murder by killing someone who's doing it, right, or by shooting that person in the leg, 3 options, I think it's impermissible to kill him. You could shoot him in the leg. Okay? Now, this does not mean that it is impermissible to kill him if it's the only alternative to letting the murder occur. Okay? However, in this case, the murder case, the 3rd option, shooting the murder in the leg, that is not present in the 2-option case, would be taken in the 3-option case. That's what you do there, right? In Thomson's argument, the 3rd option of the bystander sacrificing himself, which is missing in that 2-option case, is not taken. That bystander is not going to kill himself, we're assuming at this point. So it might be thought that if an option would permissibly not be taken were it present, its absence in the 2-option case could not affect what may be done. And so if it were impermissible to redirect to the bystander in the 3-option case, it would be impermissible to do so in the 2-option case. But I don't actually think this is so. It's possible that there might be some sort of interaction effect caused by the mere presence of a 3rd option, even if it's not taken. And this interaction effect makes the 2nd option impermissible, but only in the 3-option case, without its being impermissible when the 3rd option is not present. In particular, it might be, some might think, I don't actually, but some might think that making a choice between oneself and another, let's say in the presence of the other, might necessitate treating the other as one treats oneself, even if one need not treat him as one would treat oneself when there is no such choice to be made, especially, up close and personal. So someone might agree with Thomson that in the 3-option case, the bystander may only choose to sacrifice himself and not another, or more weakly, that he must at least give himself and another an equal chance of being sacrificed. And hold that he may not turn the trolley on the one person. Oh, and hold that he may. Someone may say, okay, 3-option, I give it to you, interaction, maybe I can't treat him differently than I treat myself. But when he's not present, when there isn't this 3rd option and there isn't that choice between me and him, then I may turn the trolley on that one person in the ordinary 2-option case. Someone might say that. In fact, I think that in the 3-option case, there isn't any special interaction effect between the 2nd and 3rd option, and the bystander need not refrain, even in that 3-option case, from imposing costs on another person that he could but will not impose on himself. Now, in connection with this point, and to help make myself clearer about why I think this, note that in considering her 3-option bystander case, Thomson first argues for the indecency of the bystanders turning the trolley to the one person when he could turn it to himself instead. Only afterwards does she argue that it is permissible for the bystander to not give up his own life to save the 5. But suppose the bystander's turning toward the one person rather than toward himself would be indecent. I don't exactly know what that means, but okay, let's suppose. This alone may not show that it is impermissible to turn it in that way. For consider an analogous case in which only a very small cost would be necessary to save the 5, but the bystander is not willing to pay it. Really lousy person, right? Okay. From what Thomson says, it seems to follow that it would be indecent for him to make another person pay the very small cost in order to save the 5. But even if it were indecent, it does not seem to me to be impermissible, because refusing to pay the small cost is presumably impermissible for each person, given that 5 people will otherwise die. And Thomson's objection does not seem to be to imposing a cost on someone against his will if he would clearly have a moral duty to pay the cost himself. Maybe some people object to that, but I don't read her as saying that. While I agree that the bystander's not giving up his life to save the 5 is not in itself impermissible, unlike refusing to give a few pennies, my point here is that one needs to first show that it is permissible for the bystander or the other person not to make a certain sacrifice to save the 5 before one argues for the impermissibility of the bystander imposing the cost on another if he will not pay it himself. For if the cost is required of each, a person's failing to make the sacrifice may not show that it is impermissible for him to impose it on another. Indeed, a very strong general claim might be suggested. I call it strong claim 1. It's on the back of your handout, or at the bottom of the 3rd page. Where is it? Bottom of the 3rd page. If it is otherwise permissible to impose a cost on someone for some end, it need not become impermissible to do so merely because one does not impose the cost on someone else when one should, including oneself. Now, my second major concern about Thomson's argument can be made clearer by noting the following. Some philosophers have been concerned with whether it is morally appropriate to require that someone else do something when one is oneself refusing or has refused to do it, other things being equal between me and the other person. This type of concern might imply that it is indecent or impermissible for the bystander to condemn someone for refusing to volunteer his life, that one person, right, or to require him to volunteer his life to save the 5, when the bystander is refusing or has refused or would refuse to volunteer his own life, other things being equal between them. By contrast, notice that Thomson wishes to condemn as indecent the bystander's taking someone's life when the bystander wouldn't volunteer his own. But taking someone's life involves imposing a cost on another, a grave cost. And this is not quite the same as demanding that the other person impose the cost on himself altruistically, when the bystander would refuse to act altruistically, right, in that third option. I think that sometimes it may be morally permissible, it's at least an open question, to impose costs on others that they could not be required to impose on themselves. For example, we sometimes draft people to be a soldier, though that person need not volunteer. We may present evidence leading to someone's conviction without his being obligated to confess or bear witness against himself. I admit I haven't thought deeply about all these cases, but it's at least open to me that this is possible. So it is possible that a bystander's not being willing to redirect the trolley toward himself only implies that it is indecent of him to require someone else to redirect the trolley toward himself. It need not imply that it is indecent for him to impose the loss of life on someone else. Similarly, if it is permissible for the bystander not to give up his life, he should recognize that the other person on the track also has the permission not to give up his own life. In fact, I believe that if the trolley is redirected even by the driver, that one person, if he has a chance to send it back, may send it back. I don't think he just has to stand there and take it, but that's the story for another day. But it is still possible that it is permissible for the bystander to impose the loss on the other person, and also permissible for someone else to impose the loss on the bystander if that were needed in order to save the 5. Certainly in cases of letting die rather than killing someone, this difference between volunteering and having a cost imposed on you seems to hold. Suppose I would have to let myself drown rather than save myself. I'd have to let myself drown rather than save myself if I am to do what will save 5 others. I could permissibly refuse to let myself drown and let the 5 drown instead, I think. I have no official role, I'm not a lifeguard, etc. Yet it would be permissible for me to let one other person drown, though he doesn't want me to, in order to go instead to save 5 others. Here, I would permissibly impose a cost on that one by not aiding him that I would permissibly not impose on myself by not aiding myself. This, of course, is a case of letting die. And Thomson, as do I, believes that there is a moral difference between letting someone die and killing them. But the point is that more has to be said to show that a bystander may not redirect the trolley to the other person than that he should not make someone else pay a cost that he would not and need not pay himself. For I think this claim would be broad enough to encompass the letting die case, and I may let one person die instead, go save 5 when I wouldn't have to let myself die in order to save the 5. Now, Thomson does have a second argument for the impermissibility of the bystander turning the trolley. So far, I've just been examining that first argument. And it explicitly does not depend on considering what the bystander himself would or would not do to himself. She notes that even if the bystander would be an altruist if he could, he would give up his life to save the 5. The one person he would kill, if he redirected the trolley in a 2-option case where he can't kill himself, might not and need not consent to be an altruist. This, she thinks, makes the bystander doing what costs the other person his life impermissible. If this argument were sufficient in itself to make that bystander turning the trolley impermissible, I don't think that the first argument would be needed at all, right? So let us consider if this second argument is sufficient. First, as was noted earlier, imposing a cost on someone is not the same as requiring him to act altruistically and engage in self-sacrifice. Furthermore, it is not generally impermissible to do something to save the 5 when it would lead to the one person suffering a loss he could permissibly not consent to suffer. Presumably, the one could permissibly not consent to give up the bystander's life-saving assistance, as in my drowning case, so that the bystander may save the 5 instead. And yet it would be permissible for the bystander to do this, and in this sense impose the loss on the one. It is probably crucial for Thomson that the bystander would be killing someone, not simply not aiding that one person, but I think the formulation of her argument seems too broad to capture that alone. Note also that Thomson thinks the trolley driver is permitted and even required to redirect to the one person, even though that one does not consent to be an altruist or to the imposition of the loss any more than in the bystander case the one consented. She thinks that the driver, unlike the bystander, may do this even if he would not redirect the trolley to save himself in a 3-option case, such as is listed on your chart as handout number 7. That's the driver 3-option case. She thinks that he should turn it on himself or, turn the trolley in such a way, for example, that it goes into a tree and he's killed, right? He can't literally turn the trolley on himself. But he could do what would kill himself rather than the 5 or the 1. Now, if he should do that, and she thinks he should kill himself, he would be unjust if he didn't. Nevertheless, if he won't, in that 3-option case, he's not going to do it, he's not going to do what kills him, or if he's in a 2-option case where he doesn't have the option to kill himself, right? She thinks that he has a duty, right, to turn the trolley on the unwilling one individual. She says this because she says the driver would otherwise unjustly kill 5. Who are also unwilling to be killed. By contrast, Thomson says the bystander will have done no injustice if he leaves the 5 to die, and this makes a significant difference to the permissibility of killing the one person. So there are several things that concern me about this additional component of the argument relating to the driver and his obligations. One is that suppose the driver gave as his reason for letting the trolley go on to the 5 that he could not deliberately bring himself to do what will kill someone deliberately do what will kill someone, namely turn to the one person in the two-option case, in order to stop the killing of 5 people that will happen in a large part due to factors beyond his control. I mean, the brake stopped, right? I personally doubt that we would say that this in itself involved his treating the 5 unjustly, just as we would not say that he treated the 5 unjustly if he refused to topple the fat man to stop the trolley. But let's assume that the trolley driver would be unjust to the 5 in killing them if he does not turn the trolley to the other person in the ordinary two-option case. Thomson originally claimed that the mere bystander is permitted not to save the 5 when the cost to him of doing so would be very high. But, what if the cost, again, is very small? And what if he actually promised to save the 5? He's their bodyguard, right? It's possible that someone will say, well, that will involve some injustice to them too, if he doesn't turn it. Now, presumably in this case, it would still be impermissible on Thomson's view for the bystander to turn the trolley, since killing one person on the track is a more serious injustice, she would think, than breaking a promise to the 5. My point is only that the supposed impermissibility of a mere bystander turning that trolley it can't depend solely on his committing no injustices if he doesn't turn. Of course, in arguing that the driver is permitted to redirect when the bystander is not, Thomson does not merely rely on the fact that the bystander's letting die involves no injustice, whereas killing 5 people is an injustice. She also relies on what she calls the killing 5 versus killing 1 principle, which specifically says that A must not kill 5 if he can kill 1 instead. But, for reasons I've mentioned before, this principle doesn't seem to be quite correct, for as I noted earlier, even the driver with his hands on the wheel headed to the 5, I think may not set the bomb that will stop the trolley, but also directly kill one other person on the side, and he may not topple the fat man. So it's not the case that whenever you're about to kill 5, you can kill 1 instead. The fact that the driver will unjustly kill 5 people if he does not do what kills 1 other person, together with the killing 5 versus killing 1 principle, cannot by themselves be enough to free the driver to redirect to the other person, just by themselves, if they do not also free the driver to topple the fat man off the bridge or set that bomb. It might be suggested that something else, either on its own or in addition to his strong duty not to kill the 5 and the principle that I mentioned, explains the limited ways in which he may kill 1 person to save the 5. This additional factor could be that the driver's duty is to drive the trolley in the best possible way. So when not killing the 5 requires driving a trolley that kills 1 other person, he, but not a bystander, is permitted to kill. By contrast, toppling people or setting bombs is not a duty of his, okay? And in these respects, he's not any freer than a mere bystander. But suppose the driver had to topple a rock or set off a bomb that wouldn't hurt anyone. He would be obligated to do these things to save his 5 potential victims, though he has no special responsibility for rocks or bombs. It is the permissibility of what he could do that determines his duty to do it, rather than kill the 5. Not his special duty for driving his trolley that determines the full scope of the permissibility. If the driver may do many things besides drive the trolley to stop it killing the 5, then we cannot explain his not having permission to set off that bomb that will kill someone or topple the fat man to stop the trolley by his special responsibility for driving a trolley that a bystander lacks. This again suggests to me that there is some difference in how an agent comes to kill an innocent, non-threatening person that makes some killings to prevent 5 being killed permissible and others impermissible. And my further hypothesis is that this is a difference that marks a distinction between permissible and impermissible killings in general, for mere bystanders or for drivers. And so one might be tempted by strong claim 2, which I have on the 3rd page of your handout, a very general claim, that one will otherwise unjustly kill innocents does not give one any special permission that others lack to kill other innocent, non-threatening people to prevent the first injustice. It might give one an obligation to do what others are permitted to do when others have no obligation. I'm not denying that. Now, this strong claim is consistent with people who would otherwise unjustly kill innocents having other permissions that mere bystanders lack, not permissions to kill. For example, the driver might have a permission to sacrifice his wealth to save his potential victims, even though it would seriously deprive his family, and a bystander might not have such a permission. Okay? This strong claim would also have to be consistent with the fact that having to not kill people may give one a much stronger reason for acting than merely not letting them be killed by others, and that ordinarily having a stronger reason can make acts permissible that are not permissible for weaker reasons. For example, it might be permissible to take your car without your permission if I have to get someone to the hospital, but not if I just want to go for a drive. But suppose that I don't have a duty to take someone to the hospital, but merely an option to. I choose to do so. I think it is as permissible for me to take the car as it is for the person who has this duty. It is that someone needs to be saved, not whether I have a duty to bring that about that overrides the duty not to interfere with someone else's car, I think. My having a duty may be part of the stronger reason that I have to act, but it is not necessarily part of the stronger reason for overriding another person's right to his car. I think this would support the permissibility of the mere bystander doing this. Now, I can think of some objections to that strong claim that I presented. I'm not going to go into them right now. There might be indirect evidence in addition for the just general permissibility for bystanders and drivers to do these things, or for those who would otherwise let die to kill rather than just those who would otherwise kill. The most direct route, however, to showing that there is this general permissibility is to consider a good account, to provide a good account of moral differences between different ways in which killing can come about. And that would help explain why some ways are permitted to mere bystanders as well as to potential killers. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to try to look at some proposals in my second lecture. Now, in conclusion, I just want to say that I've considered Thomson's arguments for the conclusion that one may turn the trolley only if this is the alternative to one's killing people, not to one's letting them die. But I think there's a different argument for this conclusion that she doesn't give. So I would like to present this argument, which I found rather puzzling when I thought of it. Consider the following case called Saving by Letting Die. It's the last case on your handout, number 8. Suppose all you have to do right now is look at the top part of that handout, the top part of 8. Consider this case where suppose the trolley is on its way to kill 8 people. See that little trolley sign there? A mere bystander is involved here, no drivers, and he can either turn it away to the left, thereby killing 1 person, or turn it to the right, thereby blocking a pathway that he needs and will shortly otherwise use to save 5 other people whom no one else can save. In this case, he faces the choice of saving the 8 by either killing 1 person or doing what results in his letting 5 people die. He's not going to use that pathway. They're just going to die. Now, when I thought about this case, I found my intuitive reaction, the sort of reactions that Chris was talking about, was that the driver should turn the trolley so that it blocks the pathway, even though that results in his letting 5 people die, rather than turn it the other way where it kills 1 person. In this case, obviously, he could let it go on to the 8. That's another option, but I thought that he ought to turn it towards blocking that pathway to the 5. So then, in this case, the bystander should not kill someone, it seems, as the alternative to letting 5 die. How then could it be permissible for the bystander to kill 1 person rather than let the 5 die in Thomson's original bystander case? I mean, what the hell is going on here? Excuse me. Indeed, what seems especially puzzling to me is that, now look at the bottom of that diagram. If a trolley had, hypothetically, been headed to killing the same 5 people when they were not soon to die anyway, there's nothing wrong with them. It's not that they need someone to come and save them. It would have been permissible for the bystander, I think, to turn it away from them so as to kill the one person. At this point, they have the men with the little nets out there for people who do trolley problems, right? This just seems very odd. So it seemed odd to me. I mean, how could these be consistent? So the question is, how can it both be permissible to kill one rather than let 5 die in the ordinary trolley case, and impermissible to kill one rather than let 5 die in the saving by letting die case? Now, I think that there are distinctions between these cases. One of them has to do with the fact that in this case, when you turn that trolley, you're interfering with the means to saving the 5. This is how non-consequentialists allow themselves to draw distinctions, you see. It's true they are going to die, but it's not as a result of your letting something go, namely a trolley, to them that will otherwise hit them. It's as a result of your doing something that will interfere with the means to their survival. Now, someone may say, you know, this is a mere quibble, but I don't think it is. And it's an example of, you know, the distinctions that non-consequentialists, when they think about cases, you know, might appeal to. Now, at this point, all I want to say, because I think time had ran out quite a while ago, is that my tentative conclusion is that the cases I've described in Thomson's enormously interesting 2008 paper, and even the saving by letting die case, do not show that a mere bystander may not turn the trolley away from killing the 5 toward killing the 1. I just want to conclude, finally, with a word about what the trolley problem is, as I conceive of it now. If both the driver and the bystander are permitted to turn the trolley, but neither may topple the fat man or set off the bomb that will kill another person to stop the trolley, then the trolley problem is about why it is sometimes permissible to kill, even rather than let die, in very many cases other than trolley problems, even rather than let die, when we come to kill in some ways but not others. So understood, I think the trolley problem is a real problem that applies to cases not involving trolleys, and solving it may require explaining moral differences among different ways of coming to kill people. If this is so, then a detective on the trolley case cannot decide that something wrong was done just by finding out who done it. Further investigation will be needed. Thank you.
Frances starts today's lecture with 2 hypothetical cases, and they're familiar from the literature. The first is transplant. That's the surgeon who can cut up 1 to save 5. Most of us agree that he can't do that. He mustn't do that. The second is, I've called it trolley driver. Frances calls it, what do we got? Trolley driver 2-option case. That's her diagram 2. That's the driver of the trolley can avoid running into and killing 5 by turning onto a sidetrack and killing 1. And most of us believe that the driver may proceed. Philippa Foot asked the good question, why that difference between transplant and trolley driver? Frances thinks that in trying to answer the question why, Foot was trying to solve the trolley problem. Not so. The trolley problem turned up in the literature only in consequence of a question that arose because of Foot's answer to the question she asked. So let's go back to Foot's paper. That's a very distinguished piece of work, by the way, and it was a pleasure to reread it in preparing for today. Foot surveyed some pairs of cases relevantly similar to transplant and trolley driver And she suggested that the needed explanation lies in the distinction between negative duties and positive duties. The use she made of that idea suggests that she had the following principle in mind, the stringency principle. Negative duties are more stringent than positive duties. Now, how does that principle bear on transplant and trolley driver? Foote standardly interpreted as taking it that the following principle is a consequence of the stringency principle. I'll call it the worseness principle. Although 1, killing 5 is worse than killing 1, 2, killing 1 is worse than letting 5 die. That principle yields that although the driver may kill the 1 to avoid killing 5, the surgeon may not kill the 1 to save 5, and the stringency principle explains why. Now, both of those principles are very attractive. So Foote's solution to the problem she was dealing with was attractive. Alas, as often happens in philosophy, some cases got in the way. In a case called bystander at the switch, that's the bystander who can deflect the trolley from one direction to another, from a direction on which the trolley will hit 5, to a direction on which the trolley will hit 1. In that case, if the clause 2 of the worseness principle is true, then the bystander may not throw the switch. But surely he may throw the switch, everyone says. So now we have a problem. What makes it the case that the bystander may throw the switch, and thereby makes that attractive clause 2 false? It's that problem that I gave the name the trolley problem to. And it's plainly not the or even a problem that Mrs. Foote was dealing with. Trying to juggle things. Okay. Now, I'd like to stop to draw attention to the fact that there's another way of interpreting the Foote article. And in fact, it's a better way. She says she hasn't argued that there aren't any other principles. She says she meant to show only that we don't need to appeal to the doctrine of double effect, which Francis talked about, to explain the difference between cases such as transplant and trolley driver. So we do better to attribute to her a principle not about comparing acts one with another, but rather comparing features of acts one with another. In particular, we do better to attribute to her the principle I've called the other things being equal worseness principle. That says, although clause 1, other things being equal, killing 5 is worse than killing 1. 2, other things being equal, killing 1 is worse than killing 5. That is, what's the other things being equal? If any of you have dipped into the reading in ethics, that ceteris paribus clauses are everywhere. We would all be lost without them. What this comes to very roughly is that take clause 1, other things being killing 5 is worse than killing 1, that is, given that somebody will be killing 5, and another killing 1, then we've got reason for believing that the first is worse. Of course, it's not conclusive. It doesn't settle the matter. There may be more that emerges in the facts of the case, But as we say, as moral philosophers standardly say, other things being equal, it's worse. Now, there's an advantage to shifting to this way of interpreting the Foot article. It suggests that there's an important methodological issue in here. Instead of focusing on acts and shifting from one act to another, comparing acts, we should be looking at the features that are singled out by whatever our theory is. And in the case of Philippa Foot, it's the stringency principle. And in case of people who go in for the moral theory of rights, it would be a theory of rights that would connect with which features you pick out. I'm not going to take up time to talk about that. Perhaps we can spend some time on this at the seminar on Thursday. In any case, I think that other things being equal, worseness principle is very plausible. There's nothing I know of in the non-consequentialist literature that conflicts with it, and there's nothing in Francis's 2 lectures that conflicts with it, or so I believe. Okay, in any case, that doesn't mean we don't have a trolley problem, because instead of now asking why the bystander may throw the switch, we now ask what's special about the circumstances of bystander at the switch that makes other things not be equal in that case. So we still have the trolley problem, and I now just mention, in light of Francis's consideration of what the trolley problem is, that there isn't an issue for debate here. It's a question of what the history is, and the history of the problem is such that the problem arises because of bystander at the switch. We need to deal with him. And Francis, however, has something much larger in mind. She says at the end of her first lecture, "Let me conclude this lecture with a final word about what the trolley problem is." And then she says, I don't know whether it is, then the trolley problem is about why it is sometimes permissible to kill, even rather than let die in some ways, when we come to kill in some ways, but not others. That's a rather dark saying. But I take it that what she has in mind is that the trolley problem is about why we may kill in some circumstances and not in others. That hypothesis is confirmed by her adding that, quote, solving it requires explaining the moral differences among different ways of coming to kill. Well, it would certainly be great to be provided with an answer to the question, quite general question. When can you kill? When may you kill, and when may you not? And with an answer to the question why in each case. That would be wonderful. I mention only 3 things, however, and that is, first, I don't see any reason to think that solving the trolley problem, the narrow problem raised by bystander at the switch, requires solving the quite general problem that Francis is going to deal with in tomorrow's lecture. Second, there's nothing in Francis's first lecture that she gave today that suggests a solution to the narrow problem. And third, there's a real danger that shifting attention from the narrower problem to the quite general problem, as Francis does, will cause the narrow problem to get lost in a jungle of hypothetical cases. We'll have to see tomorrow whether that happens. Now, point 3, As I said, there's nothing in Francis's first lecture today that suggests a solution to the narrow problem that's been called the trolley problem. It isn't just my use of that term. It's the standard use in the literature of the trolley problem, in fact. As I said, there's nothing in Francis's first lecture that suggests a solution to that problem. But she does have things to say about bystander at the switch. I argued recently that we should reconsider. We should grant that the bystander may not, after all, throw the switch. And I've very briefly summarized the argument. Francis went through this, but I think it'd be just as well if I went through it again. First step. If you can throw the switch either so as to kill Alfred or to kill yourself, you may not throw it so as to kill Alfred, for you may not impose on him the cost of your saving the 5 on the ground that you prefer his death to yours. And you needn't kill yourself. Second, if you discover, you find you can't throw the switch so as to kill yourself, it won't do to say, oh, what luck, now I can turn it on to him. You still may not turn it on to him, for you may not impose on him the cost of saving the 5, which you wouldn't be willing to pay yourself. Now, if that argument succeeds, then the bystander may not throw the switch. And incidentally, it would be an interesting point that an intuition that's very popular is a mistake. One sometimes wonders, and many people often wonder, whether too much of philosophy relies on the acceptability of intuition claims that strike one as intuitively true. Here would be a case in which a strong intuition really turns out not to be true, if the argument succeeds. Well, but does it succeed? Francis thinks it doesn't, and that's putting it mildly. I had the text of this lecture, and as all the commentators, we all did, Francis devotes over 8 pages of tight text to, it's a little explosion of little arguments to the effect that I got it wrong. Now, what do we do with those? I certainly can't deal with many of them. First, some of the claims she makes I just found baffling. For example, Francis claims that a person, quote, need not refrain from imposing costs on another person that he could but wouldn't impose on himself. What did she have in mind? Does she really think that you may turn that trolley on to Alfred because you'd prefer his death to yours? That's a response to that argument. That question, I have no idea what to do with this argument. Second, some of the complaints that she makes strike me as idle. And for example, I assume that you may refuse to turn the trolley onto yourself to save 5 people. Francis says she agrees that that's true, but she complains that I didn't show that it's true. That's an idle complaint. A consequentialist would say that you ought to turn the trolley onto a person whose death would be best if there is such a person, and if there is such a person and it's you, then tough. But a consequentialist would also say that the surgeon ought to kill the one to save 5 in transplant. I don't feel the need. We're operating within non-consequentialist assumptions, and I simply take it that among them is the fact that if you can save 5 by giving up your life, it is not required of you, other things being equal, that you do so. The third complaints that some of them don't seem to me to make contact with anything I said. First it says, quote, "I think that sometimes it may be morally permissible to impose costs on others that they could not be required to pay on their own." Unquote. Why does she think that? She says, quote, "For example, we may sometimes draft someone to be a soldier, though he need not volunteer." Who's that we? It's at most governments who may draft people. Indeed, it's only governments that can draft people. And what governments may do to people is not the same as what people may do to people. Moreover, I say at most governments may draft people, because in case it hasn't been noticed, on many views, not even governments may. And some of her other complaints would take more time to discuss than those that I've mentioned. And I've run out of time. Anyway, perhaps this issue will reappear later in the week.
Okay, Professor Kamm will take a moment to
No, I
respond.
think the audience,
Oh?
should I? You want me to? I don't know. I just that with respect to the second complaint, that I don't believe I ever complained that you hadn't shown that a person doesn't have to give up their own life to save the 5. I'm not sure why you say that. I'll look through my paper again. I don't recall saying that. I didn't require you to do that, certainly. I assumed it as well. Why do I think that you need not refrain from imposing costs on others that you would refuse to impose on yourself? I guess I gave those cases, I did it with respect to the letting die cases, that I refused to let myself drown to save the 5. But there's someone else who I could save, the one person, they don't want to drown. I let them drown to save the 5. I'm preferring my life to theirs with respect to saving other people. Now, I'm not, in this case, harming someone, but I certainly am, letting them drown when I wouldn't let myself drown. And that was one of the cases that I gave to support the view that, you could impose costs on others you wouldn't impose on yourself. I also gave the example of the very selfish person who wouldn't give a few pennies that he had a duty to give to save 5 people. And I thought that even though he wasn't doing it, if everybody did in fact have a duty to save the 5, that he could impose the cost on someone else. True, he should be doing it, but that doesn't mean that he can't impose it on someone else who should be doing it. So those were the things that I said to support that first claim. Maybe I'll leave it at that because we want to have question period.
Okay.
Sorry, I
Would you like?
Oh, okay. To mention a reply to this. This small amounts, I find that very puzzling. I mean, suppose I would like to see to it that Oxfam gets $5. Well, I don't feel like paying it. It isn't much money, but the fact that it isn't much money doesn't make it all right for me to steal from somebody else to pay for that $5 that I don't feel like paying myself. So, the fact that it's a small amount of money doesn't seem to me to affect things at all. And in the drowning case, that's not doing anybody a harm. That's a matter of choice of saving people.
Yeah,
which is
I said
altogether
it
different.
wasn't just a small amount. It was something that I thought one would have a duty to do. So if it's already established that you have a duty to give and that you're not giving it, then that might put it somewhat differently, but cast of light on it.
Thank you. We can take, we have a bit of time to take some questions from the audience. We have a floor microphone I'll ask you to use because this is all being recorded. So if you'd like to pose a question. Anybody want to ride the trolley? Please come up, sir.
I have a question for Professor Thomson. So maybe you'll just tell me to read your article, but anyways. So in the argument for the impermissibility of flipping the switch if you're the bystander relies on saying that you don't have the obligation to turn it on yourself, right? But wouldn't it be permissible to turn it on yourself? In which case it could also be permissible to turn it on someone else?
The fact that it's permissible to do it to me makes it permissible to do it to somebody else?
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't think you would want to say that. The fact that it's permissible for me to, to
Dye your hair.
to dye my, well, thank you, Michelle. That was lovely. Permissible for me to dye my hair doesn't make it permissible for me to dye Shelley's hair. I think you
Sure.
don't. No, I mean, I like the question. I think it's a nice question, but I think you wouldn't want to agree that the fact that I may do such and such makes it permissible for me to do the such and such to somebody else.
Sure, but the argument that you're making is that if you can't, if you aren't obligated to do it to yourself, then you aren't permitted to do it to someone else, and that doesn't seem to follow. You're saying you aren't obligated to turn it on yourself, and hence you aren't permitted to turn it on someone else.
If I'm not obligated to do something for somebody, I'm a little lost. If I'm not obligated to save 5 people. Let's stick to the example. I'm not obligated to save these 5 people by killing myself, and it wasn't from that fact alone that I said that I may not kill the other fellow. But the thing is, if I may not kill him because I would prefer that he die than that I die, and that seems to me to be right. That is, that I may not on that ground.
Right. I think her claim that I'm not obligated to do it was preceding her conclusion that, therefore, I can let the 5 die.
Yes.
It wasn't used as support for the idea that I can't do it to someone else.
The idea, yes. The idea is that if you're not going to give your own life up, then you're going to have to let them die, unless you, of course, get him to volunteer. But in case he says, sorry, no, then you have to let them die.
I should probably leave the floor to someone else.
Now, one thing that seems like an obvious thing to say that neither of you said is that you might think that I'm required to turn the trolley on myself. I have an obligation to sacrifice myself, but I have an excuse for not doing so. It's a form of understandable human weakness that I wouldn't do so.
Do you really think?
I don't think either of us
human
believes that.
weakness that.
No.
It's what the criminal law would say, or might say.
I doubt that the criminal...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think the criminal law would say it, because the criminal law would not think that it was merely an excuse, but a justification. An excuse implies that, you know, you really ought to do otherwise, but the strain and so forth. But a person who did it would not be thought to have done something altruistic or supererogatory, but simply have done their duty, whereas the other guy was excused. So I don't think the criminal law would do that, actually, what you said it would do.
Professor Wallace.
Something that figured in Francis's lecture fairly prominently, I thought, was the driver Topple case, which she thought told pretty decisively against the idea that if you if you can kill one or kill five, you're obligated to kill one rather than kill fewer rather than kill more people. And that seemed to be a principle that Francis was attributing to Judy. And I guess I'd like to invite you both to say a little bit more about this case. For Francis, the argument relies on having a firm intuition that it's impermissible for the trolley driver to kill the one person by getting them to topple onto the tracks, even if that's a way of avoiding killing more people. And I'm not entirely, I sort of get the intuition, but I'm not sure how much weight I'd really want to attach to it. And maybe argument just gives out at a certain point, and there's nothing much more to say. But I'd also like to hear what Judy would say about that kind of case, which I thought it was interesting that Francis was introducing into the discussion. So,
Well, if I could just go back, I mean, I mentioned that Professor Thomson had the case of the doctor who had poisoned his own patients, right? And she dealt with the issue of at a later time, could he, rather than anybody else, kill the one person to give the organs to that person? And I don't think the doctor in that case can do it, all right? And I think that pushing the fat man over the bridge, you know, if let's say the bystanding driver, you know, he wakes up after a faint, he's been thrown from the trolley and so forth. There's a bit of gap in time and so forth, and his people are going to die, right? And I don't think that he can any more than the culpable doctor. He's not culpable, but he's responsible, right, for the death. Kill that kill the fat man. So for the purpose of, kill the fat man for the purpose of stopping the trolley. I want to be clear, that's what I'm saying. And so I just thought that the fact that at the very time, you see, I'm not saying that if he could redirect the trolley onto another track where it will topple a fat man, that he shouldn't do that, because that's the same as redirecting the trolley away from the five. It's just that it's this idea of doing something, I hate to use this word because I don't actually believe in it, but it sort of captures, you know, as a means to saving those five people, that when it's impermissible for others to do it, it doesn't become permissible for him to do it, even in that very instant where it would be his option. But I'm interested also in what Judy thinks about it.
I don't know what to say, Jay. That fat man case appeared in an early paper of mine many years ago, and it still seems to me to be right. And so you ask yourself, well, what's the source of that intuition? What's it issuing from? And I think it's that this guy is not involved. He's not involved in the situation. He's outside of it. The guy drags him in. And it's something like that's at work. There's no general thesis in here because they instantly, Francis starts thinking of initial cases of dragging somebody in, and it's this kind of thing that I'm suggesting that we do well to avoid. But it's something like that seems to be responding. But it is in general an intuition that you cannot drag somebody into the path of the trolley, and modulo one's getting an argument against it. That seems like an intuition that we can rely on. All of these intuitions, though, I think it's a matter of just waiting and seeing. I mean, there's room for argument otherwise, but I don't think it's going to arise here. I think that pulling the guy in from X is what's doing the work. I think it's a good question.
Can you come to the microphone? Can you come to the microphone, sir?
Off track? Oh, what can we do to him? I can't do that. Yeah.
I'll start again. I may be way off track, but today there was sort of an accident with the military. Some soldiers were killed or Marines were killed out in the West. And it made me think about being a general or being a trolley driver. The question to me when I first got into these trolley driving questions was, isn't there something we can do? Aren't we obligated to do certain things before we become trolley drivers? Aren't we obligated to do certain things before we become generals? Aren't we obligated to do certain things before we become teachers or philosophers? So I put it to both of you. Are there certain things we're obligated to do? Maybe not drive trolleys is what I'm suggesting.
Well,
Unsafe trolleys.
yeah, I don't think that I would disagree with you that we ought to try to avoid being in situations of these sorts where we have to make these choices. But I don't think that we should stop thinking about the answers to the situations that may arise where either it would cost an awful lot to avoid being in these situations, and then you have to figure out how many people are going to be left to die if we spend a lot of money protecting trolley tracks or whatever. So there are all these issues about, I agree with you, in a world of scarcity, what's tragic or dilemmatic situations we want to avoid being in. But I don't think that helps us at all or should be a substitute for trying to give an answer to what we should do when we do find ourselves in the situation.
I think it's a good question because it seems to me that's absolutely right. A trolley driver has an extra responsibility to take care of the public, to avoid harming the public, and this is going to figure. Similarly for generals, similarly for anyone who occupies a role that involves being in charge of what happens to human beings, has responsibilities by virtue of occupying that role. It's an important one. The question is whether or not that point shows that anything that was said about these cases won't do. That is, you might want to say, look, take the trolley driver. He's got a... And my own feeling is that if he can either turn it on to one or kill it on to himself, then he ought to turn it on to himself. And I'm confirmed, I feel slightly the stronger in that direction, given your point that this is a trolley driver who's got responsibilities because of the role he occupies. But I think you would want to see whether or not that's going to show that any of the intuitions are false. It might, in which case it would be of interest. But so I think it's a good point.
Professor Dworkin? Sorry. Okay.
This is addressed to Judy, but I'm sure Francis will want to comment as well. In your work on physician-assisted suicide, you drew a fairly sharp distinction between the intentions and or the motives with which a person acts and what it's permissible.
Sorry, Jerry, I'm not getting it.
Am I not going through?
On assisted suicide, on the assisted suicide paper.
Right. You drew a fairly sharp distinction between the motives and intentions with which, say, a doctor acts and what is permissible for him to do. Now, with respect to the issue of the bystander, sometimes you seem to be saying, well, what I would be doing if I weren't prepared to impose a sacrifice on myself is by basically saying something like, well, I'd rather he die than that I die. Now, that's a fairly despicable thing to say and says something about me, but it may nevertheless be the case, given that if I don't do it, 5 people are going to die rather than 1. It's permissible for the person to impose the cost on the one, even though he didn't do it for admirable reasons.
Is it? I mean, look, we're operating, so far everything that's been said, I think, fits into a conception of ethics that's objective rather than subjective. We're not operating on a subjective conception of ethics. And the fact that we're operating with objective considerations to whether or not a person may do anything doesn't mean that it isn't relevant what the situation is. And that is, if the reason why I don't turn it on myself, the reason why I turn it on him is that I prefer him to, but still objective, we're not just asking whether I'm at fault for doing this. We're asking, given that I don't want to die, and that fact is the supposed justification for my turning it on him, the answer is it isn't. The fact that I don't want to die doesn't justify my turning it on to him instead. And I'm now not asking whether, because it's always got to be relevant what people's wants are. We're not invited, because we're going to be objectivists about ethics, to ignore the relevance of what people want.
But I take it that the fact that you bring forward is not that it's better that he died than I died, but that by doing so I can save people, 5 people by killing 1.
Yes, but see, if I don't do it, if I don't kill myself, the other option is, I've got 2 remaining options: kill him and let the 5 die. But nobody is required to to accept the cost of saving the 5. Nobody is required to do that. And I am here imposing on him a cost to save. Look, the argument can go through without starting with the third 3 options. I introduced the 3 options simply because it makes it just that much more vivid that what the options are. But take the 2-option case. This guy is not required to give up his life. I am not required to give up my life. Nobody is, other things being equal, required to give up his life to save 5. So how can I then impose this on him? Because it would be very nice that the 5 get saved.
Yeah, see, the thing is that Jerry, I tried to distinguish between giving up your life to save someone else and imposing a cost that involves another person's losing his life on that other person. So it seemed to me that, Judy, one of Judy's first questions to me was, why do you think that you need not refrain from imposing costs that you wouldn't impose on yourself? And it seems to me that I think that I consistently think that, look, I'm not going to give up my life, and I don't have to give up my life to save those people, all right? But I could understand it if someone else imposed the cost on me, just as I'm willing to impose it on someone else. So I'm willing to universalize that, right? And it seems to me a consistent position. I think Judy just doesn't think it's consistent. And the only thing I did was to, try to support that was I gave these letting die cases. That person I leave to drown to go and save the 5 doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to give up his life to save the 5. I could save him and save the 5, but, not bother him, by letting myself drown. I'm not willing to let myself drown. But I could understand it if someone left me to drown to go and save the 5. These are different types of things that are done to you. And I think Judy doesn't think that the difference doesn't amount to much. So that's how I would answer your question. It's not that I prefer that he die. It's just that if it were a question of someone imposing on me, all right, I don't want to die, but I certainly wouldn't say, I prefer that you impose it on someone else. I could understand completely that you only tossed a coin between us or decided on other grounds that I was the one who was going to be left to die or harmed, okay? So it isn't just this preference that I not die, because in that situation, of course, toss a coin. It wouldn't be right not to, between me and someone else's life, or prefer them for one reason or another. But the giving up of one's life is a different question.
I just want to repeat that the drowning case is very different. And it seems to me, if I am not willing to give up my life to save 5 people, the prospect that somebody else will want to save those 5 people and therefore kill me to save them seems to me to be unacceptable. I'm entitled to resist this.
Professor Herka,
I guess this is a question initially for Judy. It's a related question. And the principle is that I may not impose on Alfred the cost of, you may not impose on Alfred the cost of your saving the 5 on the ground that you prefer his death to yours. You could change that to, you prefer your life to his. That would put a slightly different twist on it. And I think you're often permitted to make choices because you prefer your life to somebody else's. And the question is, what's the distinction between the cases where that is permitted and when it's not? So a couple of examples. I mean, a simple example, you and Alfred are drowning and there's one piece of wood that can save you. I think you're permitted to grab the piece of wood for yourself because you prefer your life to Alfred's. I think that's okay. Now that's a saving case, it's not an imposing costs case. But many people think that in innocent threat cases, and you might not agree with this, but many people think that in innocent threat cases, like I think your case where the fat man falls off the cliff and is going to land on you and kill you, you're permitted to kill him, but he's also permitted to try and kill you, because each of you is permitted to seek the outcome in which his own life is saved and the other one's is lost, because he prefers his own life, and in order to secure that outcome, impose a cost, namely death, on the other person. So that's an actively killing case rather than a saving case. And I think there are other cases where some people would say, I'm permitted to kill someone rather than let myself die because I prefer my being alive to my not being alive. So the question is just, where do you draw the line, if you draw one, between cases where it is permissible to act on a preference for your life over somebody else's, and the cases where it's not?
There's no way in which I'm going to produce an answer to that. But to go back to the difference here, in the one case, what's in question in this bystander case is saving 5 people. While I understand if you grab the piece of wood before I get to it, that's fine. I didn't have any right to that piece of wood. I didn't own. If I owned the piece of wood, then I have a ground for objecting. But if I don't own the piece of wood, then whoever gets it first gets saved. But the bystander at the switch case is very different. It's a matter of killing somebody to save 5 other people that he is not responsible for bearing the cost of, and I'm not responsible, which is very different from who gets to the. It isn't as if we're asking who gets to the saving of the 5 first, and if I get there first, then I get there first, then if I win, and so I kill him. It doesn't work like that, Tom. It isn't as if I get there first, then it's okay for me to kill him, though neither of us need to be willing to bear this cost.
It's a preliminary case before the ones in which there's killing, and you're permitted. I thought there were cases where you were permitted to kill out of a preference for your own life rather than somebody else's. Do you think there are no such cases?
The innocent threat situation, I think is difficult. The difficulty lies in the fact that you don't want to regard morality as licensing fights. Who wins? And that's what you're inviting us to attend to in the innocent threat. For people who haven't, it's this guy falls off a cliff, this fat guy falls off a cliff toward you, and there you are, and he's headed down. And now, intuitively, one says, you're allowed to knock him aside. So, on the other hand, isn't he then entitled to, now what do we do with this? I dislike the idea that we should agree that ethics says, fine, there'll be a fight. Why do I dislike? I'm not sure I know what to say, but I resist it. That is that it seems to me ethics should always leave it room for all of us to behave in the right way without fights with each other to see who wins. And what you're offering us is exactly one of these messy cases. I don't know what to say about the innocent threat case. Here's another example of these cases where our intuitions are running us into trouble. And I think I'd like now to back off from this kind of case and ask, well, what should we consider as other things being equal relevant here? So that's a great question.
My sense was that Judy thought that I didn't think she said what you said. She could correct me, but she didn't, so maybe I'm wrong. But I thought her view was that when the fat man is coming at you, he's going to be violating your rights. And so when you try to stop him, even by killing him, he has no right of self-defense or defense to kill you, not at least to kill you in return. So it isn't a fight. All the right.
To avoid the difficulty,
Yeah.
because my sense is you gotta avoid that difficulty. You can't have ethics licensing fights. At least so I think.
Okay, we are. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I know there are many questions left. Save them for tomorrow and
Yes,
Thursday.
please come back. Things will
come
get
back.
better.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. Ride home safely.